Hello and welcome. I'm Catherine Hadro, and this is a special EWTN Pro-Life Weekly report with the latest on COVID-19 vaccines, the use of aborted fetal cell lines, and what the Catholic Church is saying about it all. The Vatican Monday declared it, quote, morally acceptable for Catholics to receive COVID-19 vaccines that used fetal tissue from abortions in either testing or production, quote, when ethically irreproachable COVID-19 vaccines are not available. The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith stressing, though, that the illicit uses of the vaccines does not and should not in any way imply there's a moral endorsement of the use of cell lines coming from aborted babies. This Vatican news comes exactly 1 week after the U.S. Bishops' Conference released its official statement on the COVID-19 vaccines and ethical concerns. That announcement, signed by the chairmen of the Doctrine Committee and the Pro-Life Committee, justified the use of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, saying they are not morally compromised, even though the fetal cell lines were used in the confirmatory testing. But the U.S. bishops said Catholics should avoid the AstraZeneca vaccine because the aborted fetal cell lines were used in its design, development, production, and testing. The statement caused an outcry from many U.S. Catholics, including from Dr. Stacy Trysankos. She's a scientist, theologian, mother of 7, and is executive director of Bishop Joseph Strickland's St. Philip Institute. Trysankos gives voice to the grievances many U.S. Catholics are holding.
I felt the frustration. I felt the frustration personally with the moral calculus, I guess I would say. There was too much emphasis on this perception that the bishops are sitting in their chairs, thinking real hard, trying to appear very reasonable. And what us mothers and fathers out here needed was something more human, something with some heart in it, something more from a shepherd or a father saying, this is at least acknowledging how hard this decision is. This is abortion we're talking about. This is not some abstract calculus equation where we can just figure out the right answer with an equal sign. Since when did it become okay to use an aborted fetal cell line in research? Like, that's never been okay.
Here to address this and more, we are joined on Skype with Archbishop Joseph Naumann of Kansas City, chair of the U.S. Bishops' Pro-Life Committee. Your Excellency, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Catherine, and your viewers and listeners.
Thank you. I understand you want to address the questions Catholics have right now, so let's dive right in because there are a lot of them. First, I want to summarize for our viewers that 7-page statement both you and Bishop Kevin Rhodes released last week about the COVID vaccines. It condemned the use of aborted fetal cell lines in either the testing or the production. It discouraged Catholics from receiving the AstraZeneca vaccine because its production did involve aborted fetal cell lines, but ultimately did encourage Catholics to receive either the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines, which were tested against aborted fetal cell lines. First, would you agree with that summary of the statement released last week?
Yes, Catherine, with the one caveat. I mean, we actually did say that the AstraZeneca one could be used if there was no other available. So again, we would, and I appreciate what Dr. Stacy said at the beginning. We wish there was available to people a vaccine that was totally completely free of any taint to abortion. And I certainly share her passion that we don't want to in any way imply that the decision made by the researchers to use aborted fetal cell lines wasn't a moral one or ethical one. But the question we were responding to, despite that, can it be permissible, is it licit for a Catholic to be able to use these vaccines in the current context? So,
can you speak to the original abortion involved in COVID-19 vaccine development, and what is the involvement exactly?
Again, that varies with the vaccines that you're talking about. With the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, there were no aborted fetal cell lines used in the production or the development. However, they did use aborted fetal cell lines in the testing to see if they were effective. Um, the AstraZeneca one, on the other hand, does use these aborted fetal cell lines that go back to 1960 when they were when the abortions actually occurred. So I think that's an important point to know, that these are very old cell lines. It's not like new abortions are happening because of these vaccines. So there's and there are some vaccines that are still in development. I think there are 13 or so near the final stages, and some of those are completely free of any connection with abortion. And if those become available, certainly that would be our encouragement for Catholics to use those. But if the only options are these, then we think the Moderna and Pfizer are even more remote from their cooperation in abortion than the AstraZeneca one.
The reason you and Bishop Rhodes gave for permitting Catholics to receive either the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine is, quote, thus, while neither vaccine is completely free from any connection to morally compromised cell lines, in this case, the connection is very remote from the initial evil of the abortion, a point you just reiterated. But Your Excellency, isn't a remote connection to abortion still a connection? And can you explain why the vaccines are listed then?
Yeah, we actually, the term is remote cooperation, which is an ethical term. So, and it's talking about what cooperation a person that's receiving the vaccine actually is having in the abortion. And that's why we say it's remote, because the person receiving the vaccine really had no influence on the decision on how that vaccine was tested or developed. So in receiving the vaccine, they're not giving approval to those decisions that were made by pharmaceutical companies, basically.
To that point, is it also considered remote simply because of the amount of years between the abortion happened and the vaccine testing? Can you clarify that?
Yes. I mean, I think it's important to note that we don't see this as encouraging abortion. Certainly that's not our intention, and it's not like new abortions need to occur for these cell lines. These cell lines have been replicated for decades now, and so they're using the same cell lines, I think, more out of convenience. And again, this is where we think, and this is why the bishops of the United States really early on in the COVID epidemic, we asked our government, please make sure that there are ethical vaccines available for our people. And we said, first of all, so that we can receive these, but also from a practical point of view, that people wouldn't reject receiving these vaccines because of any connection with abortion.
And can you clarify, is this USCCB teaching about remote connection and cooperation? Where does this moral theology ultimately come from?
Well, actually, and as you mentioned, the Vatican just put out a document, and all of that whole theology on cooperation, there's what's called formal cooperation, where you actually are, this would be the researchers that are making the decision. They're formally cooperating with this in a way, whereas the person that is receiving it, it's remote. And this goes way back in Catholic moral teaching, but it's been used in several documents in the last 20 years before the COVID crisis, and because there are other vaccines like the rubella measles vaccine, the chickenpox vaccine that's used, that also use these aborted fetal cell lines. And so the Vatican had already spoken about those and what the principles were. And again, the principle is that it's licit, that it's permissible. People aren't obligated to take the vaccinations, but it's licit and permissible. We have an obligation to do what we can to protect our own health, as well as to do what we can to protect the health of others. And those are good ethical reasons why one might choose to be vaccinated in this case.
I spoke earlier today with Dr. Stacy Trasankos. She's executive director of the St. Philip Institute in Tyler, Texas. She has a doctorate in chemistry, master's in dogmatic theology, and previously worked as a chemist. She has been a vocal critic of the U.S. bishop's response to the COVID vaccine. Take a listen to what she told me earlier about that disappointment some U.S. Catholics are feeling right now.
We don't want to be painted into that corner again where we have to make this choice, this morally coerced choice. We want to fight this. We want to demand something better. And it felt, to me, it felt like the leadership, the Catholic leadership, bioethicists, bishops, went and ran into that corner and left us out here to fight on our own. We needed some heroism. We needed some leadership.
Archbishop Naumann, what is your response to that? And what do you want to say to U.S. Catholics who share that sentiment?
Well, again, I respect Dr. Stacy, and I share her passion that we want to build a culture of life and end this culture of death, and would like to protect every unborn child. And I would say to her, again, we were early on. Now, the news media and others didn't really take an interest, but early on we were advocating, please give us vaccines that are not tainted in this way. However, when that's the only choice before people at the current moment, the question is it permissible for their own health and for the health of others to take it? And the answer to that is yes. Is it also permissible for individuals to say, I'm going to choose not to be vaccinated for this precise reason, and I want to give them perhaps a more heroic witness? And the answer would be yes to that as well. But right now we have to deal with the choices that are in front of us. And I think there are people that will debate how serious is this pandemic and epidemic. I've heard that as well. But we've seen how lethal it can be for certain parts of the population. And so can there be moral justification? I think there is moral justification to use these vaccines. Not everybody has to make that decision. And if we do use them, we are even more obligated to raise objection to pharmaceutical companies and the government to give us ethical vaccines and not to keep resorting to these old aborted fetal cell lines.
You are a U.S. Archbishop, chair of the Pro-Life Committee. As a Catholic Church leader, as a pro-life leader, what is your message then to the scientific community for ever using cells that come from a baby that was killed by abortion?
Yeah, abortion is never an ethical choice. It's always the taking of a life of the child. And it's never ethical to use the remains of aborted fetus in research. And so I would say to the scientific community, don't resort to this. And we don't need to. We have the ability to create these medical remedies without using that. And I think Moderna and Pfizer have shown that. They didn't use the aborted fetal cell lines. Unfortunately, they did these confirmatory tests. But we could avoid this if our scientists would take that position that they don't want to be tainted in their moral decision. For them, it's a much more grave situation, those that have chosen to use this research in this way.
One question I'm seeing people raise is, how can a Catholic take up the moral obligation to protest a vaccine that was tested using aborted fetal cell lines if they are receiving the vaccine? How can you both protest it and receive it? Is that possible?
Yeah, I think it certainly is possible. You're taking it because of health reasons, perhaps your own health, but also the public health. So it's a life issue in that regard. And because, again, you're remote in your cooperation with the abortion. This abortion happened decades ago. It's not encouraging future abortions. But it's important for our voice to say abortion should end, and also the use of aborted tissue in scientific research needs to end as well. So I think we can say both of those messages with integrity.
Do you believe Catholics are morally obligated to receive the vaccine? Are you a bad Catholic if you don't get this vaccine?
No, you're not morally obligated. You know, what we say in the document is that it's permissible. And if you do choose, then the choice should be made because you're trying actually to do an act of charity to protect the health of others. And there is a moral obligation to work for the common good. And so that's where but that doesn't mean you're morally obligated to take the vaccine. But if you do, part of your motivation for that is for the common good.
Your statement said, quote, "There is no available alternative vaccine that has absolutely no connection to abortion." You've already mentioned this already, but should Catholics who are not immunocompromised wait then for a completely ethical alternative, one that does not use aborted fetal cell lines in production or testing?
I think, as I said, Catholics can choose to be vaccinated or they can choose not to be vaccinated. And there are other considerations. Of course, some people have concerns about other side effects to the vaccines. And neither the Vatican nor our document really can address that. That's not our expertise. But if what we're told by our government health agencies as well as the pharmaceutical companies that these are safe, a Catholic could choose to utilize the vaccine or choose not to. That becomes a moral choice that each of us can make, and each of us can have good motivation. The motivation to protect the public health in one area. For those that choose not to, it can be to give this heroic witness, but also they need to take measures to try to protect the health of others if they make that decision as well, to do what they can with the means that are available to follow the protocols to try to help not transmit this virus to vulnerable populations.
Are there any additional questions or concerns you've heard from Catholics on this topic that you want to directly address?
No, I think there are some good things that are coming out of this. I think people are becoming more aware that not only these COVID vaccines, but other vaccines have used aborted fetal cell lines. And I think this can be good. And we have seen some progress to our advocacy with some pharmaceutical companies making ethical vaccines. There's even a rubella vaccine that is available, but it's not been approved in the United States. It's approved in Japan. So I think hopefully out of this will come more advocacy with our pharmaceutical companies and governments to give us vaccines that are completely free of any connection to abortion.
And finally, Archbishop Naumann, ultimately, what is your message to U.S. Catholics as they discern the ethical issues involved with the COVID-19 vaccines?
Well, I think in everything we need to pray. We need to ask the Holy Spirit to give us wisdom and to make the right choice, the moral choice for us. And we have to weigh these goods, the good of protecting our health, the health of our loved ones, the health of the community, and also at the same time to stand strongly, to protect innocent human life and to bring an end to the culture of death and end to abortion.
Archbishop Joseph Naumann, chair of the U.S. Bishops' Pro-Life Committee, thank you for coming on and for addressing these questions and concerns.
Thanks, Catherine, for the opportunity. God bless.
God bless. For this special report, we have a special call to action. We wanted to create a way for you, our Catholic viewers and listeners, to protest the use of aborted fetal cell lines at any stage in vaccine development. Whether it is with development, testing, or production, there is no excuse and no reason why scientists should be using cells that came from an aborted baby ever. Here is how you can follow our call to action to voice your concern. Go to prolifeweekly.com and sign our petition telling vaccine developers that fetal cell lines should not be used in vaccine development at any time. As more COVID-19 vaccine options become available, the need for transparency and reform only increases. Catholic Americans should not be forced to worry about violating their deeply held moral and religious beliefs. As Catholics who uphold the dignity of life, we protest every single abortion, and we protest the use of an aborted baby for any kind of scientific experiment. This is a way for you to protest the use of aborted fetal cells in vaccines. Sign our petition at prolifeweekly.com.